Hello and welcome to another LinkedIn Live with me, Garth Sharif. I am glad you can join me on this Thursday morning for, again, another discussion about artificial intelligence, generative AI. And it's timely because of the visit by Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, and they're the developers of ChatGPT and other AI solutions, to talk to Congress about both the strengths and opportunities created by generative AI and AI in general, but also where the threats are and what we might need to do about those threats. And that's why today I've titled this LinkedIn Live, "Should AI, including generative AI like ChatGPT, Google's Bard, and the numerous generative AI products that are out there now, be regulated?" And it's an important question on several fronts. And Sam Altman came to Congress, lots of questions. Of course, there's some partisanness to any speaker that goes to the U.S. Congress, but I think a really substantive conversation. And I think more and more of my LinkedIn lives will be around AI. I've been talking about AI for a number of years, but really with generative AI, which, as I said in previous LinkedIn lives, is not necessarily an exponential step up in terms of the technology itself. If we've been following the technology, ChatGPT, there were predecessors to this. Um, we could have seen potentially this development uh, 5, 10 years ago. But in terms of its social impact, that is always harder to measure. How are people going to react and use these softwares as they become more readily available? How does that affect communication, jobs, the way we communicate? That is harder to predict. And what we're seeing now, as we are being inundated with AI solutions, and some of that is how much we should be using this in our personal lives, professional lives, FOMO, which I've talked about before, fear of missing out. But really, these are uh, useful tools in a lot of ways. And we are moving into a different way of working, a different way of communicating, a different way of using tools. And the knowledge economy, which has been fairly shielded from technology advancements, when we talk about where the most impact happens, previous to let's say ChatGPT, it's around automation and robotics. And I was just in the United Airlines lounge. I flew to Chicago to deliver a training. Don't always go to the lounge, but had a lounge pass, and they had a almost like a Roomba bot that was going around that you could put your trays on, your food trays, and it would take it to a central area. And so we see that that's technology, that's some sort of robotics, and we think, well, that's potentially going to take away blue collar jobs, jobs of servers or those that are working um, on a manufacturing line. But ChatGPT has opened up the possibilities, and now with other generative AI solutions, that things that we do, CPAs, lawyers, engineers, and others that focus more on what we call the knowledge economy, may be affected. And then this brings up a question, which is what surprisingly Sam Altman um, advocated for, which should AI be regulated? Should there be regulations, and what would those look like? And some thought to this. So Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, who's developed ChatGPT and other AI solutions, said yes, there should be some regulations. He also offered some ideas of how that could happen. And interesting enough, that might create a space. And I'll just share one of the many articles written about this subject, that might create a space for lawyers, engineers, programmers, and auditors and CPAs to again come back. Anytime there's a major change, and I can speak to CPAs, it seems darkest like when we had the internet bubble burst in 2000, and then for us in the CPA profession, Enron and subprime crisis. There's some challenges with cryptocurrency, but there's, after the wave of bankruptcies or frauds or just mass concern, there can be opportunities. And Sam Altman did talk about opportunities that I thought would, for example, for me as a CPA working in assurance and audit, uh, be interesting. It would open up doors. But in this conversation, which were there were questions posed to Sam Altman, because he was speaking to Congress. What was the big concern, beyond just the things that I've talked about? Where is the information coming from that ChatGPT and Google's Bard um, and Bing, which is adopting ChatGPT, where is that information coming from? What is the veracity of this information? We had a LinkedIn Live last week about AI hallucination, generative AI's hallucination, where embedded in all this really amazing writing that could be produced by a human, or even better than what you could write or produce, there can be some fabrications in there. And it's not that AI is trying to lie or anything like that. It's just sometimes it's picking up other information. This is also part of the alignment problem, a book by Brian Christensen, and we hear that problem brought up a lot when it comes to AI. But this because Sam Altman was on the floor of Congress, was about the upcoming elections in the United States and other elections that are happening around the world, and the ease. And this is what AI is doing. It is allowing, with very little programming, very little understanding, because ultimately with AI there are programmers that are coding and they're doing work to set up AI. But once AI sort of gets set up, and there's things that the programmers and others might do to always refine and make better. But once it starts to sort of gather data, understand its purpose, it's sort of self-sufficient in some ways. And we as end users don't need to know the programming. Like, how many of us actually know how the program behind ChatGPT works, right? Interesting that Facebook has released some of their algorithms to the public. They've done this, and there's been pros and cons to this, because they feel like it's better for some of the proprietary AI algorithms to be out there, could be used. They're kind of playing it off as an altruistic public goods act, but you could also see it that they're trying to create a space where there's not these big early adopters in terms of like OpenAI, that others will come in, and then the field will be saturated with more AI solutions. It's just these larger companies, which I think Meta would see as a threat. But Sam Altman is on the floor of Congress to talk about what this might look like, because end users can very easily, with a lot of AI technology, recreate voices, videos, put together what are called deep fakes, or uh, videos, photos that it's very, very, very difficult to tell if it's real or not. And that's what's really happening. The blurred lines between what is real, a real photograph, a real article, a real video, and what isn't, what is fiction. And it is going to become harder. And this is we're quickly moving into a place where really you don't have to be that sophisticated to put together a photo that is misleading, or put together a video. Not that I always watch 60 Minutes. If anybody watches 60 Minutes out there, that was something I used to do when I was young. But I don't know why I'm defensive about watching 60 Minutes. I still think it's classic journalism. And I remember The Insider by Michael Mann discussing the big scoop that 60 Minutes had on the tobacco industry. They played an important part in sort of American news media, but it feels a little bit dated. But I was actually watching this because it was in the gym. It was on, and they had a segment on frauds on seniors, and that's happening with more frequency. And some of these frauds, grandparent frauds, sometimes that they're referred to, don't involve necessarily AI. Somebody is on the phone. They say, I'm your grandson or granddaughter, and I'm in trouble, need some money. And in that way, the individual maybe doesn't scrutinize the call. But what was interesting about it is that the voice, you would think, is some person's voice on the other line, that they might be muffling to maybe make it seem like it's the granddaughter or grandson of the elderly person that they're trying to defraud. But with voice apps, it's very simple to grab somebody's voice, especially if their voice is in the public domain, like mine is right now. I have to go, I have to tell my parents about this, and put it into an AI software where you can actually type in what you want it to say in a phone call. You could also have the phone call, the caller ID, come under the name of the child, and that's public information, and have a phone call that goes to your parents, and my parents are elderly, that has my voice, my caller ID, and says that I'm in trouble. I'd like them to wire some money. And it was the ease, and there was a segment in 60 Minutes in which a millennial was taken off guard because they had her boss's voice, which was the interviewer, say, "Hey, I've left my passport and I'm heading off to another geographic location. I need my passport number right now." And she gave the passport number, not knowing that the voice on the other line was completely generated by AI. And that was concerning. It was concerning from a point of view of, and I saw a couple of like, oh no. It was concerning from, obviously, from how we need to protect those that might be susceptible to fraud, but it's also not necessarily a generational thing. It's not just the elderly. That was a millennial, and for me, that would have been a call that I wouldn't have questioned the voice. So, like, do we question voices? We don't get many phone calls nowadays, but do we question the voice on the other side? It's being real or not? In some ways, could make people neurotic and paranoid. And this is what Sam Altman was discussing. And, there's obviously going to be a massive impact on jobs, like I talked about earlier. Like, our world is going to change. And I don't like to prognosticate, because sometimes you play the tape back and I'm way wrong. But I feel with confidence, I can say this is the next sort of massive change in the way we operate, and how we work and how we communicate. Now, what does it mean on the ground? We're going to have to wait not that long. We're going to have to wait. I'm not going to prognosticate. I'll let others do that. But when it comes to what this might mean for politics and misleading information, this is where Sam Altman surprisingly said we need to regulate AI. And this is actually where there was some bipartisan support for this in the U.S. Congress. Very, very rarely happens. There might need to be a need for regulating. And the question was, like, what does regulation look like? Because obviously we're going to benefit from this technology. There's going to be benefits for our work, for other things, with generative AI. Of course, there's going to be challenges as we adopt it in our personal and professional lives. But at the world at large, the question about misleading information being directed in a certain way for voting purposes, for influence, it's concerning. So Sam Altman gave some suggestions for a regulatory body to license AI programmers. Again, maybe somewhat self-serving, because OpenAI is a first mover to this, and they're ultimately open AI, but they are entering business development relationships with other companies like Microsoft. And so he suggested including a combination of licensing and testing requirements in this regulatory agency, that you would have to be licensed, and then you'd also be independently audited. And I heard the word audited, and as an auditor, I said, "Ooh, that's interesting." And when we talk about audits, it doesn't necessarily mean we look at the code. Obviously, the code would have to be looked at in the company, but you'd also look at entity level controls, who's running the company, what's the alignment, how have they looked at the alignment problem. And the alignment problem is the issue that AI is directed to produce an output, and it's very good at doing that, but it doesn't share our values, and it sometimes doesn't know the values of the output that it's providing, and may give an output that thinks it makes sense based on its programming, but it's conflicts with what we want and a social good. So that might be part of the audit as well. So I thought, well, that's interesting. That might be a new field for CPAs and other professions. And so the question I had at the beginning, and you can let me know, we're still learning about this. Should AI be regulated? Because regulation is polarizing as a subject. I'm for regulation where it makes sense, because without it, you might have some reckless use of something, a reckless application, such as an AI. And Should it be regulated? I don't know yet. I feel like it should. I'm moving towards that it should. We're probably generally when we actually regulate something is when there's a massive fallout. When something goes absolutely wrong. When we talk about regulating internal controls in companies, and public companies should have internal controls. They should have a healthy board of directors that talk and communicate, and they should really understand the risks of their business and mitigate those risks. We would say, why should that be regulated? That's just common sense. It's almost like OpenAI and other AI solutions. Of course, they should be doing the societal good, the public good. But of course, sometimes it doesn't work out like that. And when it came to Enron and WorldCom in the mid 2000s and those collapses, that's when Sarbanes-Oxley, the two senators, came together to pass a bill to say, you know what, we'd like public companies for you guys to, do your own thing and self-regulate and make sure that you install internal controls that protect the public and protect yourselves, but it doesn't seem like you're capable. So now there's, for public companies and accountable companies, a requirement to have their internal controls um, looked at by an auditor, by an accounting firm. So, and that came out of a massive scandal, right? So I think Sam Altman is getting ahead of things, which is great. I think the conversation that's happening not just in the U.S. but in Canada, in Italy, for example, I think they've already banned ChatGPT. Other countries are trying to figure out, what should we do? Should we put a halt on this and really analyze the problem? If I were to, again, I said I wouldn't do this, but I'll do this in a way that maybe I'm not putting myself too much out on a limb. I think most likely there will be some sort of problem. Something will happen in the next year or so, or hopefully not too soon. That will be, we will look at it as an AI issue. That something happened with AI that caused misleading information, caused a schism, whatever it is. And it might be generative AI or other AI solutions. And I think Sam Altman and others will be back in front of Congress, and other organizations and the EU and others will start to say, okay, we might need to think about this. It's hopefully it goes a different path, that we start to really discuss this, because as I talk about this more, I think the regulation is probably going to make sense, but hopefully it doesn't come to a point where we just kind of kick the can down the road until there's a calamity, which is sometimes what we do. But yeah, as I said, I think a lot of my LinkedIn lives are going to be AI related. I think, and I just saw this on LinkedIn. I think if you're following individuals on LinkedIn that are part of the AI community, I think that's something you should do. The number of generative AI apps that are there, not just for searches or for writing, but for productivity, for budgeting, for there's more and more being developed. And of course, they're not necessarily used as much as ChatGPT, but the concepts are out there, and we're going to see this more and more. I mentioned Grammarly before. Grammarly is a company started up in California. I use it a ton. I don't know if anybody's used Grammarly just to do grammar check, spelling check, but it also checks for tone in your writing. Are you writing in a formal voice, a inquisitive voice, a friendly voice? And it adjusts some of your writing if you want to reflect a certain tone. But there's a beta version of it, which will basically take your writing and just rewrite it. Just give you a couple concepts and rewrite the email. And it's pretty good. I felt I didn't want to use it because I still like my voice when I write emails. But phew, it's tempting to say, hey, I have a really difficult conversation that I have to have over email around feedback, a particular feedback item. Can I get Grammarly to help me craft? And more than craft, maybe do a lot of the heavy lifting to get this message across, and use some of the things we talk about in communication, like make sure it's smart, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time bound. Make sure we give space for them to have input, that we're showing vulnerability when we're talking about a feedback issue that is maybe difficult to come across, and get Grammarly to give it a first shot. And maybe the first shot is 90%, 95%, or 100% of what I use. it's coming into every facet of our lives, and you'll see it more and more come as sort of a casual option. It was just a casual option when I was writing an email, Grammarly beta, and looked at it for one thing, and I thought, this is pretty good. It's only going to get better, right? And these are the conversations that we'll be having more and more. How much of these things do we start to use and leverage? But especially in the knowledge economy, as CPAs, we have ethical responsibilities. We have responsibilities to be professionally skeptical. We have to maybe take a step back a little bit more than the public and ask ourselves, where is this information coming from? Does it represent what I want to say? Is it taking things from other spaces that isn't mine? We have some responsibilities there. All right, so thank you for watching. I think let me just put some chats here. Oh, look at this. We had a number of um, wonderful. Thanks, Candace. Very nice of you to. Only new comments are appearing. Still with. So I found out this with LinkedIn and Restream. LinkedIn does not allow the comments to be handled on Restream, which would be so much better that I could just like while I'm doing Restream. But I think LinkedIn has decided that that's a firewall. They don't want a bridge. So, but I want to say thank you to Candace for all of your comments. Appreciate it, and for all those who were watching, thank you for watching. And I believe we may be back next week. I'm actually doing a little bit more travel than I have in the past number of months, and in fact years, because of COVID. So we might be back next week, but I believe if we're not back next week, I'll be back the week after. All right. So hopefully you can join me for the next LinkedIn Live, and it seems to be thematically that it'll be something AI dot AI will be the conversation. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your Thursday and Friday. Have a good rest of the week, and until the next time, thanks everyone.